I'm going to talk today about digital platforms in a gender perspectives, and in particular, I'm going to talk about the digital platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk, Apple, Clickworker, Microworkers that fragment large data projects into small tasks, allocate them to myriad anonymous providers worldwide. Each of them executes tiny bit remotely of the old job and receives a small compensation for it. They usually paid by piecework. Examples of these micro tasks are recording utterances aloud, such as reading aloud "How old is Dolly Parton," as in this example, or labeling images, which might mean drawing the outline of some part of the objects, like air in images of faces, adding text, such as adult content or not, or recognizing specific objects in a larger picture, such as saying whether this is a cherry in a plate of food. This type of tasks, small, repetitive, tedious, serve the needs of the artificial intelligence industry, which needs large, annotated, high quality databases for its development. Now, these platforms do not pay very much and expose workers to global competition. At the same time, they are accessible to pretty anyone with basic digital skills and an internet connection. Clients have very limited access to workers' profiles. They usually don't know their gender, which means the likelihood of discrimination is very low. Also, these are tasks that can be done from home, potentially at any time of the day, which might suit the need of women with care duties who may be otherwise disadvantaged in standard job markets. Therefore, it is legitimate to ask the question of whether this is enough to make these platforms inclusive environment, gender blind environments, and even whether online micro work can be a first step toward a more stable or more rewarding job in the digital economy. This is what, for example, Mary Gray and Cedar Suri suggest from their fieldwork in India, where they met women who had left a job to dedicate themselves to their families and micro worked in the meantime in the hope of getting back to the job market later on. Now, the problem is that, of course, today we do not have longitudinal data that would help us follow the trajectories of these people over time because simply the phenomenon is too recent. So what I do is look at the resources that men and women can leverage today as a starting point toward an evolution in this tech world. And by resources, I mean, first, human capital, the skills, knowledge, and experience that are key resources to navigate the platform world, for example, to find better paid tasks, but that also enable to learn, to build expertise, and over time to transition to a more stable or otherwise better career path. In addition, I look at social capital. Social relationships are known to be key channels for access to resources, including informational resources, advice, and knowledge. They are known to be highly effective in job seeking, and they also contribute to the formation of human capital. If I have a friend who can help me out when I have a problem with my computer, it's not only someone who saves me money and effort to go to a professional, but it's also someone who could teach me so that next time I can sort out the problem alone. Data and methods. I use data from a study that consisted in online questionnaires that were administered as remunerated tasks on platforms. It is on platforms that you find workers, otherwise difficult to reach. So the questionnaire with a similar design was first administered in France 3 years ago with over 900 responses, complete responses, and just 3 months ago to the Spanish speaking world in Spain and Latin America with more than 1,400 responses overall. These questionnaires included questions, of course, about people's education and skills to measure their human capital, but I need to say a few words on the way I operationalize social capital. To do so, I use an instrument called the position generator. That it is illustrated here in this simple table, which is a simplification of the real question that I asked. But basically, the idea is to ask people whether they know anyone from a list of occupations, and if so, if this person is a man or a woman. This operationalizes the idea of a position-based social capital, and that is professional occupations capture different resources in society, and therefore measuring the access of individuals to people in these different occupations is a way to measure their access to the resources that these occupations embed. Concretely, our questionnaire required respondents to choose from a list of 50 occupations, and that included 8 technology and digitally related specific occupations. Let's move on to the results, starting from human capital. If we look at educational attainment, we see that a very high proportion of these micro workers in all three settings have quite good education, a high proportion have university education, bachelor's level or higher, which means they form a highly educated population above the common levels, the average levels of the countries where they live for people of similar age. I am not showing tests here, but there's no statistically the significant difference between men and women in this respect, which means that these micro workers are not only able to execute simple tasks, but also more complex ones. And their strong human capital is brought by platforms to serve the need of data-informed digital industries. But if we look at the subjects of specialization of these degrees, we will notice that women are much less numerous to have chosen computer science and engineering. Here we see the plot for Latin America, where this gap is particularly evident. The gap for fundamental science, which includes biology, chemistry, maths, and physics, is much smaller. It is a little bit larger in France and Spain, which also have the same gap as Latin America in engineering and technology. This is an instance of something that is known in the literature, has been observed in many countries. That's the so-called STEM gap. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that's the fact that women are less likely than men to specialize in these type of subjects, which precludes access to them to highly paying jobs in technology industries. Now, our women reflect that gap, although broadly speaking, to a lesser extent than the general population, because their gap concerning science is smaller. But let's look now at social capital. If we just ask the question of whether men nominate more contacts overall, no. The number of positions accessed is about the same on average for men and women. The size of their personal network, their social capital is the same. But let's look deeper into that. Do men nominate more men than women overall? Do they nominate more men than women in tech professions? And what do women do? This is, in fact, a question about homophily, and to answer it, I build for each of the occupations in my list a homophily indicator, which takes value -1 in the extreme case of pure heterophily, that is, when all nominations are to the opposite gender, and takes value +1 when it's the opposite, that is, all nominations to the same gender, so homophily, and all intermediate cases will have values in between. So if we look at this indicator for each occupation for the two groups, men and women. What do we see? Let's look at the plot for the case of France. The top panel represents the responses of female migrant workers, ordered from the most heterophilous on the left to the most homophilous on the right. And the most heterophilous, so where women have nominated more men, includes stereotypically masculine professions such as construction worker, plumber, or truck driver. To the right, the homophilous professions, that is, those where women have nominated more women, again include stereotypically feminine professions such as domestic worker, secretary, or hairdresser. We notice that women have been overall quite heterophilous. That is, there are a majority of occupations, bars here, that are negative, that is, that correspond to heterophily, with respect to those that are homophilous, and that eight tech professions, which are here represented as the shaded bars, they are all on the negative side, which means that women have nominated many more men than women in these professions, with the notable exception of one, community manager, where women nominated more women. But think about it, community manager is a profession associated quite often to qualities such as emotional labor, relational or social activities, etc. And it's often, exactly for this reason, associated to a more feminine approach, and more essential, often essentialized as a more feminine profession within this work. The bottom panel represents the choices of men, and that's the opposite. On the left, it's their heterophilous choices. There aren't too many, where they have nominated more women than men, and they include the usual stereotypes, the domestic worker, etc. The great majority of male choices are for men, and that includes all the eight tech professions. This is the plot for France. Those for Spain and Latin America are very, very similar. So both groups nominate more men than women in most occupations, and both groups nominate more men than women in tech professions. Why is women's lack of same gender contacts in the tech industry an obstacle? Well, because it means that women working in tech are not present to people's mind as the obvious example. Women lack role models and lack homophilous advisors, those that by similarity could help them most with their progress on platforms. So, concluding, platforms do not get past gender disparities. Female micro workers do experience gaps in both their human capital and their social capital that could help them transition toward better career prospects. And this could be a reason why they might remain in lower level roles without evolving, so that there is a need for widespread learning and socialization tools for platform data workers if we want to overcome this disparity. Thank you very much for your attention.